The golden sunset painted the Manhattan skyline in hues of amber and rose, but Karim Nazari paid no attention to the breathtaking view from his penthouse office on the 85th floor. His eyes were fixed on the quarterly reports scattered across his mahogany desk, his fingers drumming an impatient rhythm on the polished surface. At 42, he had built Nazari Enterprises into one of the most successful construction companies in New York, but success always demanded more. "Mr. Nazari, your daughter's school called again." His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Amira's dance recital starts in 30 minutes. Karim glanced at his Patek Philippe watch and frowned. He had promised Amira he wouldn't miss this one, but the Johnson Tower project couldn't wait. "Send my driver to pick her up. I'll try to make it for the end." 6-year-old Amira had been practicing for weeks, twirling around their mansion in her pink tutu, her dark curls bouncing with each movement. She had inherited her mother's grace and beauty, reminders that made Karim's chest tighten even 5 years after Sarah's passing. Since then, he had thrown himself deeper into his work, building his empire higher and higher, as if each new success could fill the void she had left behind. The buzzing of his phone interrupted his thoughts. It was Ahmad, his project manager, at the new development site. "Sir, we need you at the site immediately. There's an issue with the foundation supports that requires your attention." Karim's jaw clenched. He had specifically ordered premium materials for this project, refusing to cut corners despite pressure from the board to reduce costs. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. The elevator ride down was a blur of emails and phone calls. In the back of his chauffeur-driven Mercedes, Karim barely noticed the city lights beginning to twinkle against the darkening sky. His mind was already at the construction site, calculating costs and considering solutions. The site was a hive of activity even at this hour, floodlights casting harsh shadows across the skeletal framework of what would soon be Manhattan's newest luxury high-rise. Ahmad met him at the entrance, his usually composed face etched with concern. "Show me," Karim demanded, following his project manager through the maze of equipment and materials. As they approached the main foundation area, something felt wrong. The air was thick with tension, and workers were exchanging worried glances. "We discovered that some of the support beams don't meet specifications," Ahmad explained, pointing. "Down to the structural diagrams. The materials delivered aren't what we ordered." Karim's dark eyes narrowed as he examined the documentation. "This is impossible. I personally reviewed the contracts." He pulled out his phone, scrolling through emails. The specifications were clear. A commotion above made them both look up. The crane was swinging a heavy load of steel beams, the movement slightly erratic. Karim's trained eye caught the irregularity in the motion, and years of experience sent warning signals through his mind. "Stop the crane!" he shouted, but his voice was lost in the cacophony of construction noise. He started moving forward, his expensive Italian shoes collecting dust as he rushed toward the control station. Time seemed to slow down as he ran. Could see the crane operator now, gesturing frantically at the controls. Something was wrong with the hydraulics. The load was swaying dangerously, the steel beams catching the glare of the floodlights like giant needles threading through the night sky. In that moment, Karim's phone buzzed again. A text message flashed across the screen. "Daddy, where are you? My dance is next." Attached was a photo of Amira in her tutu, her smile bright enough to illuminate the entire city. The sound of groaning metal filled the air. Karim looked up just as the crane's arm buckled. His last conscious thought was of Amira's smile, and how he had promised her this time would be different. Then the world tilted sideways, and everything went black. In the quiet darkness that followed, a ballet recital continued on the other side of the city. A little girl in a pink tutu danced her heart out, her eyes constantly darting to the empty seat in the front row, waiting for a father who wouldn't arrive. The night that would change everything had only just begun, and the delicate threads of fate were already weaving a new pattern, one that would bring together lives in ways no one could have predicted. The pediatric wing of New York Presbyterian Hospital was usually quiet at 3 in the morning, but tonight was different. Sarah Matthews, a volunteer art therapist, was working late, organizing supplies for tomorrow's activities when she heard the commotion. Medical staff rushed past. The craft room, their hushed voices carrying fragments of conversation about a high-profile patient and a construction accident. Sarah wouldn't have paid much attention, except for what came next, a small figure in a pink tutu being led gently by a social worker. The little girl's face was blank, her dark eyes wide and unseeing, still wearing stage makeup that caught. The fluorescent lights like tears. "We can't reach her aunt yet," the social worker was saying to a nurse. "She's somewhere in Europe. The housekeeper is coming, but she's at least an hour away." Sarah watched as they tried to convince the child to sit in the waiting area, but she remained standing, still as a statue, clutching a worn, stuffed elephant. Without thinking, Sarah stepped forward. "I could stay with her if you'd like." Both hospital workers turned, relief visible on their tired faces. "This is Sarah Matthews, one of our most dedicated volunteers," the nurse explained. "She runs art therapy sessions for our long-term patients." The social worker nodded gratefully. "This is Amira Nazari, her father." She paused, glancing at the child before continuing in a lower voice. "There was an accident. He's in surgery." Sarah knelt down to Amira's eye level, noting how the little girl clutched her elephant tighter. "That's a beautiful tutu you're wearing," she said softly. "Were you dancing tonight?" For a long moment, Amira didn't respond. Then, almost imperceptibly, she nodded. "You know, I have some special paper in the craft room," Sarah continued. "The kind that dancers use to make origami ballet shoes. Would you like to see?" Another tiny nod. Sarah held out her hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Amira took it. Her small fingers were cold. The craft room was a sanctuary of color and creativity, its walls covered in artwork from current and former patients. Sarah guided Amira to a small table by the window, where the city lights twinkled like stars. From her supply cabinet, she retrieved sheets of delicate paper in soft pinks and whites. "My mother taught me how to make these," Sarah explained, as she began folding a sheet. "She was a ballet teacher. She always said that sometimes our hands need to dance as much as our feet." Amira watched intently as the paper took shape under Sarah's fingers, transforming into a miniature pair of point shoes. When Sarah placed them in front of her, the little girl reached out to touch them with wonder. "Would you like to try?" Together they spent the next hour folding paper, Sarah gently guiding Amira's small hands through each step. Gradually the tension began to leave the child's shoulders. When she struggled with a particularly tricky fold, her brow furrowed in concentration rather than distress. "My elephant's name is Tata," Amira suddenly whispered, her voice barely audible. "Daddy gave him to me when I was little." Sarah smiled encouragingly. "Tata looks like a wonderful friend. Maybe we could make him some tiny ballet shoes too." The ghost of a smile flickered across Amira's face, gone almost before it appeared. But it was enough, a tiny crack in the wall of shock and fear. Dawn was breaking over the city when Karima, Nazari, Amira's aunt, finally arrived in a whirlwind of designer perfume and worried exclamations. She stopped short at the sight of her niece, carefully placing a paper ballet shoe on her elephant's foot, while a stranger with kind eyes and paint-stained fingers helped steady her hands. "Who are you?" Karima demanded, her accent sharpening with stress. "What are you doing with my niece?" Sarah stood slowly, careful not to startle Amira. "I'm Sarah Matthews, a hospital volunteer. Amira and I were just—" "We don't need volunteers," Karima interrupted, reaching for Amira. "We have private staff for everything. Come, Habibi, your father is out of surgery now." As Karima led Amira away, the little girl looked back over her shoulder at Sarah, her free hand still clutching one of the paper ballet shoes. Something in that glance, a mixture of longing and loss, struck Sarah deeply. She had seen that look before in her own reflection many years ago. Sarah gathered the remaining paper ballet shoes, placing them carefully in her drawer. Something told her this wouldn't be the last time she saw Amira Nazari. In her 15 years of volunteering, she had learned to trust her instincts about which children needed her most. And in those dark eyes, she had seen a soul drowning in silence, just waiting for someone to reach out with understanding and patience. Outside the hospital windows, the rising sun painted the sky in shades of hope. its light touching the origami ballet shoes like a promise of grace yet to come. The night of crisis was ending, but the real story, the one about healing, transformation, and unexpected connections, was only beginning. 4 months passed like autumn leaves drifting in the wind, each day bringing subtle changes to the hospital's pediatric wing. Sarah had become a constant presence in Amira's life, their bond growing stronger through shared moments of creativity and quiet understanding. The craft room, once just another hospital space, had transformed into their special sanctuary. Today, they were starting a new project. Sarah had brought in small terracotta pots, packets of sunflower seeds, and rich, dark soil that smelled of possibility. Amira's eyes lit up at the sight, a rare and precious occurrence that Sarah had learned to treasure. Sunflowers always turn their faces toward the sun, Sarah explained, helping Amira fill her pot with soil. Even on cloudy days, they know exactly where the light is. Like magic, Amira asked, carefully placing a seed in the center of her pot. Like hope, Sarah replied, watching as the little girl patted the soil gently over the seed. In the months since the accident, Amira had slowly begun to emerge from her shell, though her father's condition cast a long shadow over her progress. The door creaked open, and Karima entered, her high heels clicking against the linoleum floor. Sarah noticed how her designer clothes seemed more rumpled these days, her perfectly maintained facade showing slight cracks. The weeks of hospital visits and business responsibilities had taken their toll. "Aunt Karima, look," Amira held up her pot proudly. "We're growing sunshine." Something softened in Karima's expression. "That's lovely, Habibi, but we need to go now. The doctors want to run some tests on your father." Sarah caught the slight tremor in Karima's voice. "Why don't you leave Amira with me? We can take care of our sunflowers while you handle the medical discussions." Karima hesitated, her internal struggle visible. Over the months, she had gradually stopped questioning Sarah's presence, perhaps recognizing how her niece bloomed under the volunteers' gentle guidance. Very well, but only for an hour. After Karima left, Sarah and Amira continued their gardening. They set up a small area near the window where their pots could catch the sunlight. Other children from the ward began drifting in, curious about the activity, and soon the craft room was filled with the sound of childish laughter and excited chatter about which plant would grow first. "My daddy loves gardens," Amira confided, as they cleaned up later. "We have a big one at home, but nobody takes care of it anymore. It makes the house sad." Sarah listened carefully, recognizing the weight of what wasn't being said. Sometimes gardens need a little help to remember how to be happy again, just like people. "Could we make Daddy's garden happy again?" Amira's voice was barely a whisper, heavy with hope and fear. "When he wakes up, we'll ask him," Sarah promised, her heart aching at the trust in those dark eyes. "For now, let's focus on our sunflowers. They'll need someone brave and patient to help them grow." Later that afternoon, Sarah was organizing supplies when Dr. Rivera, the head of neurology, appeared in the doorway. His expression made her heart skip a beat. "Ms. Matthews, could you come with me? There's been a development with Mr. Nazari." Sarah followed him through the corridors, her mind racing. She had no official connection to the Nazari family, but over the months she had become Amira's anchor, the one constant in the child's disrupted world. Outside the ICU, Karima was pressing, her hands to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. But for the first time in 4 months, they were tears of joy. "He's awake," Karima managed to say. "My brother is awake." The news spread through the hospital wing like a wave of light. Sarah stood back, watching as medical staff rushed in and out of the room, their faces bright with professional satisfaction. This was what they had all been hoping for, but now that it had happened, Sarah felt an unexpected knot of anxiety in her stomach. Everything would change now. The careful routine they had built, the safe space they had created for Amira, it would all shift like sand in the wind. Sarah thought of the sunflower seeds they had planted that morning, still buried in the dark soil, unaware that their world was about to transform. "Sarah," Amira's small voice came from behind her. "Can we show Daddy our garden when he's better?" Sarah turned to find the little girl clutching her stuffed elephant, hope and uncertainty warring in her expression. She knelt down to Amira's level, just as she had done on that first night 4 months ago. "Of course we can, sweetheart. But right now, your daddy needs lots of rest and quiet to get stronger, just like our sunflower seeds need time in the quiet, dark before they can grow toward the light." Amira nodded solemnly, understanding more than a child her age should have to. "Will you stay with me while I wait?" "As long as you need me," Sarah promised, even as she wondered if that would still be her choice to make. The businessman who had been frozen in time for 4 months was awakening, and with him, the complex world of wealth, status, and family expectations that had been temporarily suspended. Outside the hospital windows, the late afternoon sun painted the sky in shades of amber and rose, much like it had on the night that had brought them all together. Sarah held Amira's hand as they walked back to the craft room, where their tiny pots of possibility waited in the windowsill. Whatever changes tomorrow might bring, today they had planted seeds of hope in the soil and in their hearts. The world came back to Karim Nazari in fragments. The rhythmic beeping of machines, the antiseptic smell of hospital air, and the weight of his own body feeling somehow wrong. His first coherent thought was of Amira. Where was his daughter? The last thing he remembered was her message about the dance recital. And then, "Mr. Nazari," a gentle voice interrupted his thoughts. "Try not to move too much. You're in the hospital. You've been unconscious for quite some time." His throat felt like sandpaper, but he managed to croak out, "Amira, your daughter is fine," Dr. Rivera assured him. "She's been here every day, actually. She's become quite popular in our pediatric wing." Popular? His Amira, who barely spoke to anyone outside the family. Before he could question this, Karima burst into the room, her usual composure cracking as she rushed to his bedside. "Habibi, thank Allah you're awake." She clutched his hand, her fingers trembling. "We've been so worried. The company, the projects, everything has been in chaos without you." Karim tried to sit up, but his body wouldn't cooperate. The doctor stepped forward quickly. "Mr. Nazari, there's something we need to discuss. The accident caused significant trauma to your lower spine. While you were unconscious, we performed several surgeries, but..." The words that followed seemed to come from far away. Paralysis, rehabilitation, permanent changes. Karim closed his eyes, his businessman's mind already calculating losses, adjustments, implications. But one thought kept pushing through. Amira. How would he take care of his daughter now? "Where is she?" he asked, interrupting the doctor's detailed explanation of physical therapy options. "She's with the volunteer," Karima replied, a note of disapproval creeping into her voice. "This woman who runs art activities for the children. She's been spending an inappropriate amount of time with Amira, but given the circumstances..." "What volunteer?" Karim's voice sharpened. "Why is my daughter with a stranger?" Before anyone could respond, the door opened again, and there she was, his little girl, clutching something in her hands, her face lighting up at the sight of him awake. But she wasn't alone. Behind her stood a woman Karim had never seen before, dressed simply in jeans and a paint-stained sweater. Her presence, somehow both confident and unassuming. "Daddy!" Amira rushed forward, then stopped short, suddenly uncertain. The woman, the volunteer, Karim presumed, placed a gentle hand on Amira's shoulder. "It's okay," she said softly. "Remember what we talked about? Your daddy needs gentle hugs right now, but he definitely needs them." Something in Karim's chest tightened as he watched his daughter carefully climb onto the bed beside him, showing a patience and awareness he had never seen in her before. She was different, still his Amira, but changed in subtle ways he couldn't quite grasp. "Look what we made," she said, showing him what she was holding. A small terracotta pot with a tiny green shoot pushing through the soil. "Sarah taught me how to grow sunflowers. They're brave flowers, Daddy. They always find the light." "Sarah?" He looked at the volunteer, really seeing her for the first time. There was something in her eyes, not pity, which he had already seen too much of today, but a quiet strength that reminded him of his late wife. "Sarah Matthews," she introduced herself, staying near the door as if sensing his discomfort with her presence. "I run art therapy sessions for our pediatric patients and their families." "We don't need therapy," Karim said flatly. "We have private counselors." Daddy, no! Amira's protest surprised everyone, including herself. She clutched her pot closer. Sarah teaches me special things, like how to make paper ballet shoes and how to help flowers grow, and she understands about being sad without making it scary. The room fell silent except for the steady beeping of monitors. Karim looked at his daughter, really looked at her, and saw what 4 months had done. She was still wearing the delicate gold necklace that had been her mother's, but now it was accompanied by a handmade bracelet of bright threads. Her hair was styled in a way Sarah must have shown her, practical but pretty. Most striking was how she held herself, still reserved, but with a new kind of quiet confidence. "I think," Dr. Rivera interjected diplomatically, "we should let Mr. Nazari rest now. He's had quite enough excitement for one day." As everyone prepared to leave, Amira carefully placed her potted sunflower on the windowsill. "It needs light to grow strong," she explained seriously. "Just like you need rest to get stronger, Daddy." Karim watched as his daughter left with the volunteer, Sarah, noticing how naturally they moved together, how Amira reached for her hand without hesitation. The sight stirred something uncomfortable in his chest, gratitude mixed with resentment, relief tangled with fear. Once he was alone, Karim stared at the tiny plant on his windowsill. In the late afternoon light, the young shoot cast a delicate shadow across the sterile hospital surface, like a small flag of defiance against the stark reality of his new circumstances. He had always believed in controlling every aspect of his life and business, but now he wasn't even sure he could control his own body. The sunflower faced the light, ignorant of his internal struggles, simply growing as it was meant to. Perhaps, Karim thought as exhaustion pulled him back towards sleep, there were some lessons even a successful businessman could learn from a small green shoot in a terracotta pot. The rehabilitation wing of New York Presbyterian felt like a battlefield to Karim Nazari. Every inch gained, every small victory in physical therapy came at the cost of sweat, frustration, and a pride that was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. 2 weeks had passed since he had awakened, and the reality of his condition was setting in with brutal clarity. "Just 5 more minutes, Mr. Nazari," his physical therapist encouraged, watching as Karim struggled with the parallel bars. His arms trembled with effort, muscles straining to compensate for legs that refused to cooperate. "I said I'm done," he snapped, already reaching for his wheelchair. The therapist stepped forward to help, but Karim waved him away. He had built a billion-dollar empire with his own hands. He wouldn't accept help for something as basic as sitting down. Outside the therapy room, the sound of children's laughter drifted down the hallway. It was coming from the direction of the craft room, that space he had come to think of as both blessing and curse. The volunteer, Sarah Matthews, had somehow become an integral part of Amira's daily routine, and it bothered him more than he cared to admit. As if summoned by his thoughts, Sarah appeared around the corner, pushing a cart laden with art supplies. She stopped when she saw him, offering a warm smile that held no trace of pity. "Good morning, Mr. Nazari. Amira's been working on something special for you." Before he could respond, Karima's voice cut through the air like a Damascus blade. "Sarah, I believe we discussed limiting these activities. Amira needs to focus on her regular studies. Art therapy is a recognized form of emotional support," Sarah replied calmly, though Karim noticed her hands tighten slightly on the cart handle. "Amira's regular teacher has actually commented on her improved participation in class since we started our sessions." Karim watched the interaction with growing interest. His sister, always so conscious of social status, seemed unusually agitated by this simple volunteer. There was a story there, one he hadn't yet uncovered. "Brother," Karima turned to him, switching to Arabic, "this woman has been overstepping her boundaries. She's just a volunteer, yet she acts as if she has some special claim on Amira. It's inappropriate." "She's helped my daughter," Karim replied in English, surprising himself as much as the others, "during a time when I couldn't." The words cost him, each syllable weighted with the guilt and helplessness he'd been carrying since awakening. His daughter had needed him, and he had been absent, not just during his coma, but for years before that, too focused on building his empire to notice her growing isolation. Sarah's voice broke through his dark thoughts. "Amira told me you have a garden at home." The non-sequitur caught him off guard. "Had," he corrected. "It was my wife's project. After she passed, I never—" He stopped, unwilling to continue. "Amira thinks it's waiting," Sarah said softly, "like Sleeping Beauty's castle, just needing the right touch to wake up again." She reached into her cart and pulled out a detailed drawing, their mansion's garden, reimagined in a child's hopeful strokes, full of colors and life. Karim stared at the drawing, recognizing his daughter's improving artistic style, another change he had missed. The garden had been Sarah's pride and joy, a sanctuary she had created from the formal landscaping of their estate. After losing her, he had ordered the gardeners to maintain the basic upkeep, but the soul of the place had withered away. Children's fantasies, Karima dismissed, but there was something uncertain in her tone. "We have more important matters to discuss, Karim. The board is meeting tomorrow and there are concerns about the company's direction." The mention of business brought reality crashing back. 4 months of absence had created vulnerabilities in his carefully built empire. He needed to reassert control, to show strength despite his current condition. Personal matters, gardens, art therapy, volunteers who looked at him with too much understanding would have to wait. "Ms. Matthews," he said formally, "I appreciate what you've done for Amira, but perhaps my sister is right. We should scale back these sessions." Sarah's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes reminded him of Amira's sunflower, quietly determined to grow despite obstacles. "Of course, Mr. Nazari, it's your decision. But before you make it final, you might want to visit our craft room. See for yourself what Amira has created there." She turned to leave, then paused. "You know, Mr. Nazari, sometimes the strongest foundations aren't built with concrete and steel, but with patience, trust, and small acts of kindness. Your daughter understands that instinctively." The words hit him like a physical blow, echoing, with memories of the accident, of cutting corners and ignored warnings. As Sarah disappeared down the hallway, her art cart squeaking slightly, Karim found himself staring after her, an uncomfortable realization forming. This simple volunteer might understand more about building lasting things than he, with all his billions, had ever grasped. "She's manipulating you," Karima insisted, but her voice lacked its usual certainty. "Using Amira to—" "Enough," Karim interrupted. "Schedule the board meeting in my room." And he hesitated, looking at his daughter's drawing again. "Find out what happened to Sarah's garden supplies after the accident. The ones my wife used to use." Karima's perfectly plucked eyebrows rose in surprise, but she said nothing, tapping the information into her tablet. In the distance, children's laughter drifted down the hallway again, and Karim found himself wondering what exactly was happening in that craft room that could make children forget even for a moment that they were in a hospital. Perhaps, he thought as he wheeled himself toward his room, it was time to find out. After all, he had built his fortune by recognizing valuable assets in unexpected places, and something told him that Sarah Matthews, with her paint-stained hands and quiet wisdom, might be the most valuable discovery of all, though not in any way his business mind could have predicted. The craft room was empty when Karim finally gathered the courage to visit it, save for Sarah, who sat by the window, carefully pressing flowers between pages of thick paper. Late afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows, catching the dust motes in its golden beams and making them dance like tiny stars. "They're for pressing into bookmarks," Sarah explained without looking up, somehow knowing it was him. The soft whir of his wheelchair was probably distinctive enough. Amira's idea. She thought the other children might like to take a piece of the garden home with them. Karim moved further into the room, taking in the walls covered in artwork, the neat rows of supplies and the windowsill full of thriving plants. His daughter's sunflower had grown impressively, its stem strong and straight, though the flower head hadn't formed yet. "Why do you do this?" he asked abruptly. "Volunteer work when you could be—" He gestured vaguely, trying to understand. Sarah carefully placed another flower between the pages before answering. "Would you believe me if I said it makes me happy?" "No," Karim replied honestly. "Nothing is that simple." "Isn't it?" She turned to face him fully, and for the first time, he noticed a faint scar along her jawline, usually hidden by her hair. 12 years ago, I was in a car accident. I lost my parents and the ability to dance professionally in one night. I was Amira's age when ballet became my whole world, and suddenly that world was gone. The revelation hung in the air between them. Karim found himself gripping his wheelchair's armrests tighter, understanding dawning. A hospital volunteer helped me find my way back, Sarah continued. Not to dancing, some dreams have to change, but to living, to finding beauty in unexpected places. She stood, walking to the windowsill to adjust one of the plants. Your daughter reminds me so much of myself at that age. Lost, scared, but so incredibly resilient when given the chance to bloom. She's stronger than I knew, Karim admitted, the words feeling foreign on his tongue. Admitting weakness had never been his style. Would you like to see what she's been working on? Sarah retrieved a portfolio from a nearby shelf, bringing it to him. Inside were dozens of drawings, the hospital garden reimagined as a fairy tale forest, their mansion's abandoned garden restored to glory, and countless pictures of a familiar figure in a wheelchair, surrounded by flowers and smiling. She draws you as she sees you, Sarah explained gently. Not limited by what you can't do, but empowered by what you can still create. Karim stared at the drawings, his vision blurring slightly. I've never been that man, he said roughly. Even before the accident. But you could be. Sarah's voice was soft but certain. Your daughter believes in that possibility. Maybe it's time you did too. A commotion in the hallway interrupted them. Karima burst in, her designer suit slightly askew, her face flushed with anger and something else. Fear. The board meeting, she said in Arabic, her words tumbling out. Ahmad has been working against us. He's convinced 3 major shareholders that your condition makes you unfit to lead. They're calling for an emergency vote to remove you as CEO. The news should have devastated him. 4 months ago it would have. But sitting there, surrounded by his daughter's artwork, by evidence of growth and change and possibility, Karim felt something unexpected. Relief. Let them meet, he said calmly, switching to English for Sarah's benefit. But first, I want to see the accident reports, all of them. Karima paled slightly. Brother, surely that can wait. No, Karim's voice was firm. No more waiting. No more hiding. He turned to Sarah, who had been quietly gathering her things to give them privacy. Ms. Matthews, Sarah, would you and Amira be interested in helping restore a garden? The smile that bloomed across Sarah's face rivaled any sunflower for brightness. I think Amira would love that. She's been drawing up plans for weeks. Good, Karim nodded decisively, because I think it's time for Nazari Enterprises to branch out into some new directions, starting with our own backyard. As if on cue, Amira appeared in the doorway, her school backpack covered in newly added flower drawings. She froze at the sight of her father in the craft room, her eyes wide with surprise and hope. Daddy, are you here to see my special project? Yes, Habibi, Karim replied, opening his arms to her. I think it's time I saw everything I've been missing. The late afternoon sun painted the room in shades of gold and promise, while outside, the window, a small sunflower continued its patient journey toward the light, unaware that it had already helped spark a transformation far more significant than its own. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Karim's home office as he pored over the accident reports. After 3 weeks of rehabilitation, he had finally been cleared to return home, though the mansion felt different now, emptier, despite Amira's increased presence and energy. The mahogany desk that had once been his command center now served as a research station, scattered with documents instead of contracts. These numbers don't align, he muttered, comparing invoices from the Johnson Tower project. The materials, specified in the original contracts, were significantly different from what had been actually delivered to the site. Someone had been systematically replacing high-grade materials with cheaper alternatives, pocketing the difference. A soft knock interrupted his concentration. Sarah stood in the doorway, paint smudges on her jeans and dirt under her fingernails. She had been helping Amira in the garden, a project that had quickly become the highlight of his daughter's days. Amira wanted you to see something, she said, her eyes noting the scattered papers with concern. But if you're busy— No, Karim said firmly, pushing away from the desk. I've learned that some things shouldn't wait. He wheeled himself toward the door, noticing how Sarah stepped back naturally to give him space, never hovering or trying to help unless asked. It was one of the many things he had come to appreciate about her. The garden path had been recently cleared, making it easier for his wheelchair to navigate. As they rounded the corner, Karim caught his breath. The once neglected rose garden was showing signs of life. Amira stood proudly among newly planted bushes, her small face beaming. Look, Daddy, we found Mama's roses under all the weeds. Sarah showed me how to tell which branches were sleeping and which ones needed to go away. And look, she pointed to a tiny green shoot emerging from the base of what had appeared to be a lifeless plant. This one was just hiding, waiting for someone to believe in it. Karim felt something shift in his chest, a sensation that had been occurring more frequently lately. Your mother would be proud, Habibi, he managed to say. She always said gardens were like people. They just need the right kind of care to show their true strength. That's what Sarah says too, Amira exclaimed, then bit her lip, glancing uncertainly between the adults. Even at her young age, she was aware of the complex dynamics at play. Great minds think alike, Sarah said, smoothly, kneeling to examine another rose bush. Though I think your mother had much better taste in roses than I do, these are heritage varieties, very special. She spent years collecting them, Karim found himself saying. Each one had a story. He paused, memories surfacing. Like this. 1. Tea rose from Damascus reminds me of my grandmother's garden. Sarah's eyes met his, full of understanding. Stories are important. They remind us where we come from, help us understand where we might be going. She stood, brushing dirt from her knees. Speaking of which, Amira tells me you've been looking into stories of your own lately. Karim glanced at the house, thinking of the documents waiting in his office. Yes, stories that should have been told long ago. He turned to Amira. Habibi, why don't you get your garden journal? Show me all the progress you've recorded. Once Amira had rushed off, her excitement palpable, Karim's expression grew serious. The accident wasn't just bad luck. Someone in my company has been cutting corners, endangering lives for profit. My own obsession with results over process created an environment where this could happen. Sarah was quiet for a moment, watching a butterfly land on one of the newly exposed roses. What will you do? Transform it. All of it. The company. Its priorities. He hesitated, then added softly, myself. His hands gripped his wheelchair's arms. But Ahmad and his allies on the board won't make it easy. They're calling for my removal, claiming my condition makes me unfit to lead. And what do you think? The question caught him off guard. No one had asked for his opinion on his own capabilities. Since the accident, they had all been too busy telling him what he couldn't do anymore. I think, he said slowly, that perhaps being in this chair has finally given me the perspective I needed. The view from the top floor isn't always the clearest. Sarah's smile was gentle but knowing. Sometimes we need to be replanted to grow, in new directions. The sound of running feet announced Amira's return. She clutched her garden journal, its pages stuffed with drawings, pressed flowers, and carefully recorded observations. As she settled next to her father's wheelchair, eagerly sharing her discoveries, Karim found himself studying Sarah's profile in the late afternoon light. She was nothing like the women who usually populated his social circle with their designer clothes and calculated charm. Sarah's beauty was more subtle, like the heritage roses she had helped uncover, complex, authentic, and surprisingly resilient. Mr. Nazari? Her voice broke through his thoughts. You seemed far away for a moment. Just thinking about new directions, he replied, watching as Amira demonstrated her improved Arabic by labeling her garden drawings in both languages. And please call me Karim. The smile she gave him then was like sunshine breaking through clouds, warm and full of possibility. In the distance, Karim could hear his sister's voice, probably on another crisis management call with the board. But here, in this recovering garden with his daughter's laughter and Sarah's quiet presence, He felt more centered than he had in years. Tomorrow would bring its challenges, board meetings, investigations, difficult decisions. But for now, he allowed himself to simply be present, listening to Amira's excited explanations of flower languages and growth patterns, watching Sarah's gentle guidance, and feeling, for the first time since the accident, truly grateful for the path life had forced him to take. The boardroom of Nazari Enterprises had always been an imposing space, designed to intimidate with its floor-to-ceiling windows and massive marble table. But today, it was Karim who commanded the room's attention. His wheelchair positioned at the head of the table, a tablet computer and stack of documents arranged precisely before him. "These reports," he began, his voice steady and clear, "show a pattern of systematic fraud within our company. Materials designated for safety-critical components were substituted with substandard alternatives. The cost difference was then channeled through a series of shell companies." Ahmad, seated halfway down the table, maintained his composed expression, but Karim noticed the slight tightening around his eyes. The other board members shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. "Mr. Nazari," one of the older board members interjected, "while these allegations are serious, perhaps we should focus on the more pressing matter of company leadership during your recovery." "My condition has nothing to do with my ability to lead," Karim replied firmly. "In fact, it has given me a unique perspective on what truly matters. Our company's foundation is crumbling, not because of my wheelchair, but because we lost sight of our responsibilities to our clients, our workers, and our community." He pressed a button on his tablet, and the room's screens filled with images. The accident site, the substandard materials, the paper trail of fraudulent transactions. "I was part of the problem," he admitted, surprising everyone. "My focus, on profit margins above all else, created an environment where this could happen. But now we have an opportunity to rebuild, not just our reputation, but our entire approach to business." Back at the mansion, Sarah was helping Amira with a special project in the garden. They had created a small vegetable patch alongside the restored rose garden, teaching the little girl about sustainability and patience. The contrast between the two meetings, corporate power plays versus gentle nurturing, couldn't have been more striking in Karim's mind. "What exactly are you proposing?" another board member asked, pulling Karim back to the present. "A complete restructuring," he answered, "starting with the establishment of the Nazari Foundation for Community Development. 20% of our profits will be directed towards sustainable building projects in underserved communities. We'll also implement new oversight procedures and establish an ethics committee with external members." "This is madness," Ahmad burst out, his careful facade cracking. "You're talking about throwing away millions in profit. The shareholders will never accept this." "Actually," Karima spoke up from her position near the door, "I've already discussed this with our major shareholders. Many of them are quite interested in the positive PR potential, not to mention the tax benefits." She smiled thinly at Ahmad. "It seems social responsibility is becoming quite fashionable in corporate circles." Karim studied his sister with newfound appreciation. She had changed too in recent weeks, her priorities shifting after spending time with Amira and, surprisingly, Sarah. The volunteers' influence seemed to touch everyone around her, like sunshine, coaxing reluctant blooms from dormant plants. "There's more," Karim continued. "We'll be implementing new safety protocols that exceed industry standards and establishing a scholarship program for engineering students focusing on sustainable construction methods." He paused, looking each board member in the eye. "I nearly lost everything because our company cut corners. My daughter nearly lost her father. How many other families have we put at risk with our negligence?" The room fell silent. Even Ahmad seemed to deflate slightly, perhaps recognizing that the tide had turned against him. Karim pressed his advantage. "Those who choose to support this new direction will be part of something revolutionary in our industry. Those who don't," he gestured to a second set of documents being distributed, "will find generous severance packages awaiting them." Later that evening, as his driver navigated through Manhattan's rush-hour traffic, Karim found himself thinking about the small vegetable garden Amira had started. How she had explained, with all the wisdom of her 6 years, that some plants helped others grow better when planted together. Like you and Sarah, she had said innocently, you both helped me grow stronger. His phone buzzed with a message from Sarah. Amira's sunflower is about to bloom. She insisted on waiting for you before checking it. Something warm unfurled in his chest, a feeling that was becoming increasingly familiar. The board meeting, with its power plays and corporate maneuvering, felt distant compared to the simple joy of his daughter's gardening achievements. As the car turned onto their street, Karim caught sight of two figures in the garden, one small and energetic, the other tall and graceful. They were examining something together, their heads bent close in concentration. The sight made him smile, remembering Sarah's words from weeks ago about being replanted to grow in new directions. Perhaps that was what was happening to all of them. His company was being transformed, its priorities realigned like plants turning toward the sun. Karima was discovering that status wasn't the only measure of worth. And he was learning that sometimes life's most precious gifts came disguised as its greatest challenges. The car stopped, and his driver moved to help with the wheelchair. But Karim's eyes were fixed on the garden, where Amira had spotted him, and was waving excitedly, while Sarah watched with that gentle smile that had become as essential to his days as sunrise. Karima Nazari stood at the window of her penthouse apartment, gazing at the glittering Manhattan skyline without really seeing it. In her hand, she held an invitation to yet another charity gala, the kind of event she used to live for. But, lately, everything that once seemed important had begun to feel hollow. The sound of children's laughter drifted up from the street below. A group of kids was playing hopscotch on the sidewalk, their joy uninhibited by their obviously modest circumstances. It reminded her of yesterday's scene at the mansion where Amira had been teaching other children from the hospital how to plant sunflower seeds in small pots. Her phone buzzed, another message from her social circle, probably about the upcoming gala. Instead, it was a photo from Amira, a small garden party she and Sarah had organized for the hospital children. The image showed kids in wheelchairs, and with IV poles all smiling as they decorated plant pots. In the background, Karim was visible, helping a young boy paint his pot, his face lit with a genuine smile she hadn't seen since before Sarah's passing. When did everything change? She murmured to herself, thinking back to that first night at the hospital. She had been so certain about everything then, about status, about propriety, about keeping the right distance from people like Sarah. Matthews. The intercom buzzed, startling her from her thoughts. Ms. Nazari, your car is ready for the foundation meeting. The Nazari Foundation for Community Development, her brother's latest project, and one that had surprisingly captured her own interest. Today's meeting was about converting part of their family's extensive real estate holdings into affordable housing and community spaces. The old Karima would have been horrified at the idea. Now she found herself looking forward to it. At the ED mansion, she found Sarah and Amira in what had become their usual spot, the garden that was now bursting with life. But today something was different. A group of business-suited individuals was touring the space, taking notes and photos. Aunt Karima, Amira ran to her, dirt smudging her expensive school uniform. We're showing the architects how to make healing gardens. Sarah says every new building should have one. Karima found herself kneeling down, heedless of her designer suit. Is that so, Habibi? And what makes a garden healing? It needs to have spaces for everyone, Amira explained seriously. Quiet corners for thinking, sunny spots for growing, and benches where people can sit together and share stories, like Daddy and Sarah do. The mention of her brother and Sarah made Karima glance toward the rose garden. Sure enough, there they were, heads bent close together over what appeared to be building plans. The way they moved around each other was like a graceful dance, each anticipating the other's needs without words. Ms. Nazari, one of the architects approached her. We'd love your input on the community center designs. Your experience with high-end properties could be valuable in creating spaces that are both beautiful and functional. Once, she would have been offended at being consulted about community centers. Now she found herself intrigued. Show me what you have in mind. As the architect laid out the plans on a garden table, Sarah joined them, her simple presence somehow making everything feel more grounded. We were thinking of incorporating elements from traditional Arabic gardens, Sarah explained. Creating a bridge between cultures, just like these roses. She gestured to the heritage roses that were now thriving. Beauty doesn't belong to any one class or culture. It grows wherever it's given a chance. The words struck Karima deeply. How many times had she judged beauty by its price tag? How often had she dismissed something, or someone, because they didn't fit her narrow definition of worth? The children's art therapy room could overlook the garden, she found herself suggesting. And perhaps we could include a tea room, like the ones in Damascus. My grandmother used to say that the best conversations happened over mint tea and roses. Sarah's smile was warm and free of judgment. That's a wonderful idea. Amira, didn't you draw something like that in your garden journal? As her niece rushed off to fetch her drawings, Karima watched the interaction between Sarah and the architects. The volunteer spoke with quiet authority about healing spaces and community needs, her ideas shaped by years of working with children and families in crisis. There was a wisdom there that no amount of money could buy. Later, as the meeting wrapped up and the architects departed, Karima lingered in the garden. She watched as Karim wheeled himself over to where Sarah was helping Amira clean up their gardening tools. The way her brother looked at Sarah, it was how their father used to look at their mother, as if she were a rare and precious bloom that had somehow taken root in his life. "You know," Sarah said, approaching Karima with 2 cups of mint tea, "your niece has been teaching me Arabic garden terms. She says you're the best person to ask about traditional designs." Karima accepted the tea, remembering countless afternoons in her grandmother's garden. Our grandmother's garden in Damascus was famous in our neighborhood. Every Friday, women would gather there to share stories and seek advice. I had almost forgotten. Sometimes we need to remember where we came from to understand where we're going, Sarah said softly. Amira told me you're the one who taught her about the language of flowers. Our mother taught us, Karima admitted. Every flower had a meaning, a message. I used to think it was old-fashioned, but now... She looked around at the transformed garden, at her brother's peaceful face as he listened to Amira's excited chatter, at the plans for community spaces that would bring beauty to places she had once ignored. Now I think perhaps we were the ones who needed to bloom again. The setting sun painted the garden in shades of gold and promise, and for the first time in years, Karima felt something shift inside her, like a long dormant seed finally breaking, through its shell reaching for the light. The evening air was heavy with the scent of jasmine as Karim wheeled himself along the garden path. The mansion's grounds had been transformed over the past months, but this section, Sarah's meditation garden, was his favorite. Here, amid the quiet whisper of fountains and the gentle sway of ornamental grasses, he often found the clarity that eluded him in his high-powered business world. Tonight he was searching for Sarah. He had something important to ask her, something that had been growing in his heart as surely as the gardens had bloomed under their care. He found her in the rose garden, examining the heritage Damascus roses that had finally begun to flower again. "The children's art show is tomorrow," she said without turning around, somehow always knowing when it was him. "Amir is so excited about displaying her garden drawings alongside the other kids' work. Sarah," his voice was soft but intent, making her turn to face him, "I need to ask you something." But before he could continue, hurried footsteps interrupted. Them. It was Jenkins, his head of security, looking concerned. "Mr. Nazari, there's a situation at the community center site. Some local residents are protesting the development. They're saying it's just another corporate takeover of their neighborhood." Sarah's face fell slightly, but she nodded in understanding. "You should go. The community's trust is important." "Come with me," Karim said, surprising both Sarah and Jenkins. "You understand community building better than anyone. And," he added, with a slight smile, "you're much better at listening than I am." The community center site was crowded with protesters holding handmade signs. "No corporate takeover," read one. "Save our neighborhood," declared another. Karim noticed that many of the protesters were mothers with children, the very people he hoped to help. As their car approached, Sarah touched his arm gently. "Let me talk to them first. Sometimes people need to be heard before they can listen." He watched as she approached the group, her simple presence somehow diffusing the tension. She spoke with several protesters, nodding and listening intently. Children were drawn to her naturally, just as Amira had been. Soon, she was showing them pictures on her phone, probably of the hospital garden and the children's art therapy sessions. "Your Sarah is quite remarkable," Karima said, having arrived separately. The way she said, "Your Sarah," made Karim's heart skip a beat. When had he started thinking of her that way? "The foundation isn't here to take over your neighborhood," Sarah was explaining to the protesters. "It's here to work with you, to create spaces that serve your needs. In fact, we'd love your input on the designs." "Why should we trust some big corporation?" a woman challenged, but her hostility was already fading. "Because this isn't just a corporation," Sarah replied, gesturing for Karim to join her. "This is about people choosing to make a difference. Mr. Nazari, would you like to share your vision with the community?" As Karim wheeled himself forward, he saw the surprise on people's faces. His condition wasn't public knowledge. He had always appeared strong, untouchable. But now perhaps his vulnerability made him more approachable. "6 months ago," he began, "I learned the hard way what happens when business forgets its humanity. This center isn't about profit. It's about creating spaces where children can grow, where families can heal, where communities can come together." "Like your garden," a small voice piped up. One of the children had recognized him from the hospital art therapy program. "My sister says it's magic, because it makes people happy even when they're sick." The tension in the crowd noticeably softened. Sarah built on this opening, pulling out the design plans. "We'd love your ideas about what would make this space special for your community. Every garden needs different flowers to make it beautiful." Soon, people were gathering around, offering suggestions and sharing stories. Karim found himself deeply moved by their hopes and concerns. This, he realized, was what Sarah had been trying to teach him all along. That true strength lay not in imposing one's will, but in nurturing growth and understanding. As the sun set and the crowd began to disperse, now excited about the project, rather than opposing it, Karim found himself alone with Sarah again. The question he'd wanted to ask earlier still burned in his heart, but somehow this moment, watching her connect with the community, seeing her natural ability to bring people together, made him even more certain. "Sarah," he began again, taking her hand. "I've been thinking about gardens, about growth and change, about how sometimes the most beautiful blooms come from unexpected places." She turned to him, her eyes reflecting the golden light of sunset. "Karim, when I was at my lowest point, you showed Amira and me how to find light in the darkness. You taught us that sometimes we need to be replanted to grow stronger." He squeezed her hand gently. "I'm not the same man I was before the accident, and I thank Allah for that, because that man would never have seen the treasure right in front of him." Sarah's eyes glistened with tears, but her smile was radiant. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" "I'm saying that some gardens need 2 caretakers to reach their full potential. I'm saying that Amira needs you, and so do I. I'm saying—" He took a deep breath, his heart full of hope and certainty. "Sarah Matthews, would you consider making our garden yours as well?" The jasmine-scented evening air wrapped around them like a blessing as Sarah's answer bloomed between them, as natural and beautiful as the first flower of spring. The garden had never looked more beautiful. Fairy lights twinkled among the roses like earthbound stars, and paper lanterns swayed gently in the evening breeze. The once abandoned space had been transformed into an enchanted paradise, with flowering, archways and paths lined with blooming plants of every description. But the most beautiful sight was Amira's face, as she practiced her special role for tomorrow's ceremony. "And then I walk like this?" she asked, carefully carrying a small basket of rose petals. Her flower girl dress, the color of desert sunset, rustled with each deliberate step. "Perfect, Habibi," Karim assured her from his position near the garden arch. The wedding would be small, family and close friends only, but its significance felt enormous. In less than 24 hours, the garden would witness the union of 2 hearts that had found each other in the most unexpected circumstances. "Daddy?" Amira paused in her practice. "Did you know this would happen?" When you woke up and found me and Sarah in the craft room. Karim smiled, remembering those early days of confusion and resistance. No, sweetheart. Sometimes the most precious gifts come as complete surprises. Like how Mama's roses were just sleeping under all the weeds. Amira's innocent wisdom never failed to touch his heart. Exactly like that. The sound of voices drew their attention to the house. Sarah and Karima emerged, deep in discussion about final arrangements. The sight of Sarah still made Karim's heart skip a beat. She was dressed casually in jeans and one of her paint-stained sweaters, her hair tied back as she gestured animatedly about something. Tomorrow she would wear white, but this was how he loved her best. Natural, passionate, entirely herself. The children from the hospital art program finished their special project. Sarah was saying to Karima, "Wait until you see what they've created for the ceremony." Karima, who had once been so opposed to Sarah's presence in their lives, now smiled warmly. Speaking of projects, the community center plans are finalized. The garden designs you and Amira suggested have been incorporated into every floor. And the art therapy rooms? Sarah's eyes sparkled with excitement. Premium space overlooking the central courtyard, just as you envisioned. Karima's transformation over the past months had been almost as dramatic as Karim's own. Her focus had shifted from social status to social impact, her natural organizational skills now directed toward meaningful change. Amira tugged at Sarah's sleeve. "Can we check on our special flowers, please?" "Of course, sunshine." Sarah took the little girl's hand and they disappeared down one of the garden paths together. The sight made Karim's throat tight with emotion. "Are you crying, brother?" Karima observed softly, coming to stand beside his wheelchair. "Happy tears," he assured her. "I never thought I could feel this blessed again after Sarah, after Amira's mother. Perhaps she sent you this, Sarah, to heal both your hearts." Karima squeezed his shoulder. "The universe has its own wisdom, even if we don't always understand its methods." The garden had filled with workers now, making final preparations for tomorrow's celebration. The hospital's art therapy program had created beautiful decorations, paper flowers and painted signs, each one made with love by the children whose lives Sarah had touched. The centerpiece was a massive collage of photographs showing the garden's transformation, parallel to the transformation of the family itself. "Mr. Nazari," Jenkins approached respectfully. "The video presentation from the Foundation's community partners is ready for review." "Save it for tomorrow," Karim decided. "Some surprises should be shared in the moment." As evening settled over the garden, the fairy lights created a magical atmosphere. Sarah and Amira returned from their secret mission, both with soil on their hands and joy in their faces. Tomorrow, this space would witness their official union, but Karim knew the true marriage had been happening gradually over months, in shared garden work, in quiet conversations, in the gentle way Sarah helped him navigate his new life, in the thousand small moments that had knit their hearts together. "The sunflowers are perfect," Sarah reported, settling beside him. "They'll be fully opened for tomorrow." "Like everything else," he responded, taking her hand. Above them, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. The fountain burbled peacefully, and somewhere in the garden a nightingale began to sing. Amira curled up in Sarah's lap, her small face peaceful. "Tell me again," she requested sleepily, "about how gardens are like love." Sarah's eyes met Karim's as she began the familiar explanation. "Well, sweetheart, both need patience and care. Both have seasons of quiet growth and spectacular blooming. Both can survive difficult times if their roots are strong. And both," she squeezed Karim's hand, "both are more beautiful when shared." As the evening deepened into night, the garden held them in its peaceful embrace. Tomorrow would bring celebration and new beginnings, but this moment, quiet, perfect, filled with love, was a treasure all its own. The journey that had begun in tragedy had bloomed into something more beautiful than any of them could have imagined. 1 year after the garden wedding, the Nazari mansion grounds buzzed with activity once again, but this time it wasn't for a private celebration. Today marked the official opening of the Nazari Community Center for Arts and Healing, a transformation that had turned the vast estate into a space of hope and growth for the entire community. Sarah stood in what had once been the mansion's formal sitting room, now converted into a bright art therapy studio. Children's artwork covered the walls, and large windows looked out over gardens that had been redesigned to accommodate everyone, regardless of ability. Through the glass, she could see Karim leading a group of potential donors through the adaptive sports area, his wheelchair moving easily along the specially designed paths. "Mrs. Nazari?" A small voice drew her attention. One of the hospital. Program's regular participants, Emma, stood in the doorway. "Can we show you our surprise now? Everyone's ready in the garden." Sarah smiled, following the excited child. The past year had brought so many changes, yet some things remained beautifully constant, like the way children's eyes lit up when they had a secret to share. The central garden, where she and Karim had exchanged their vows, had become even more beautiful with time. Now it served as an outdoor classroom, a healing space, and a community gathering spot. Today it was filled with faces both familiar and new: hospital patients, local families, foundation staff, and, to Sarah's surprise, many of the business leaders who had once opposed Karim's new direction for Nazari Enterprises. Amira stood at the center of the crowd, practically bouncing with excitement. At 7, she had grown taller, more confident, but her heart remained as gentle as ever. Beside her, Karima, who now ran the Foundation's educational initiatives, wore a proud smile. "Welcome everyone," Amira began, her voice clear and strong, "to our special garden celebration. 1 year ago, my daddy and Sarah taught us that love can make anything grow. Today, we want to show them what their love has helped grow in all of us." The crowd parted to reveal a display that brought tears to Sarah's eyes. Hundreds of photographs and artworks showed the impact of the Foundation's first year. Children discovering art therapy, families enjoying the community spaces, elderly residents tending the communal gardens. Each image told a story of healing, connection, and growth. But the real surprise came when Emma stepped forward with a tablet starting a video compilation. Faces appeared on the screen: community members, hospital patients, foundation beneficiaries, each sharing how the center had changed their lives. "The art therapy program helped my son speak again after his trauma," one mother shared tearfully. "Learning to garden gave me purpose during my recovery," a former patient explained. "The community center showed us that miracles can grow anywhere," another resident added, "even in concrete city spaces." Karim wheeled himself to Sarah's side, taking her hand as they watched. His eyes glistened with emotion at this testament to their shared vision. The final segment of the video showed their own transformation, the accident that had seemed like an ending becoming a beginning instead. The garden's evolution from neglected space to blooming sanctuary paralleled their journey from strangers to family. As the video ended, Amira stepped forward again, holding something behind her back. "And now we have one more surprise. Sarah, Daddy, this is from all of us." She presented them with a beautifully bound book. Opening it, they found pressed flowers from their wedding day, children's artwork, and photographs of the center's journey. On the final page was a new ultrasound image, their little secret of the past few weeks, surrounded by loving messages from everyone whose lives they had touched. "Because every garden needs new flowers to keep growing," Amira announced proudly, placing her hand gently on Sarah's still flat stomach. The gathered crowd erupted in cheerful congratulations. Karima hugged her sister-in-law, whispering, "Now the circle is truly complete." As the celebration continued around them, Sarah and Karim found a quiet moment in the rose garden where their story had really begun. The Damascus roses were blooming again, their fragrance a sweet reminder of heritage and hope. "Did you ever imagine," Sarah asked, "that one accident could lead to so much good?" Karim shook his head, squeezing her hand. "I imagined success, in terms of buildings and profits. You taught me that true success grows in hearts and blooms in changed lives." A butterfly landed on a nearby rose, its wings catching the sunlight. In the background, they could hear children's laughter from the art studio, the peaceful sound of the fountain and the gentle buzz of community and connection. "And now we'll have one more life to nurture," Sarah said softly, her free hand resting on her abdomen. "Another flower in our garden," Karim agreed, his voice full of joy. Above them, the sunflowers, Amira's first gardening project, turned their faces toward the light, just as they had taught her they would. Each bloom was a testament to patience, to faith, to the power of love, to transform and heal. The garden that had once been a symbol of loss had become a source of life and hope for an entire community. And in this space, surrounded by the beauty they had created together, a family that had been replanted by fate continued to grow, proving that sometimes life's greatest challenges can lead to its most beautiful blooms. As the sun painted the garden in shades of promise, Sarah and Karim looked toward their future, not just as a family, but as cultivators of hope in a world that desperately needed it. Their story had come full circle, but like the gardens they tended, it would continue to grow season after season, blooming ever more beautifully with time.